Okay, let's start again. بسم الله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. So thank you guys for having me. I love this community. For those of you guys who don't know, I actually grew up here before Orland Park Masjid was even built. I used to memorize Quran downstairs before this like renovation happened. So this community is very near and dear to me, and I love coming back. So today we've been tasked with talking about Aisha Bint Abi Bakr, and specifically we're going to talk about the scandal, the big scandal that happened during her lifetime. But before I jump into that specific story, I want to paint a picture of who she was. Let's get to know her together a little bit so we can understand the significance of what happened to her. So I'm going to ask you guys questions. Her name is Aisha Bint Abi Bakr. So what's the name of her dad? Abu Bakr. Very good. Does anybody know the name of her mother? This one's a little harder. It's not as obvious. Her mother's name was Ruman. She has a sister that's pretty famous. Anybody know what her name is? Asma. Good job. Asma bint Abi Bakr. Interestingly enough, Asma is her half-sister. They had a different mother. So they both shared father Abu Bakr, but their mother was different. And she also has a biological brother named Abdullah. Now, because she was the daughter of Abu Bakr, she actually grows on to be very similar to her father. So some of the characteristics that we know about Abu Bakr, for example, is that he was someone who loved to give in charity. He was someone who loved Quran. He loved poetry. He was really smart. He used to like read English, like not English, read Arabic, and he was good at literature and things like that. And something that makes Aisha unique compared to some of the other wives of the Rasul and some of the other people is that Aisha was actually born after revelation came down. So Aisha's childhood, she wasn't one of those people who lived during the time of Jahiliyyah when Islam wasn't around and the Arab just had Arab culture. She was actually born after the message of Islam came. So as a child, she grew up with the message of Islam. And because her father, Abu Bakr, was a companion and the closest companion to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she really had a very close, intimate picture of what it looked like when Islam was first starting. When she was asked about her childhood, she would remember stories of how Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu used to gather. Anytime he had money or money would come his way, he would gather it and he would go out and free slaves with it. Or anytime, someone would say something bad about the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Bakr would stand up, put his body in defense of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he would get beat himself. To the point where there's actually one time that Aisha radiallahu anha remembers that her father was beat so hard that he actually went unconscious. Okay, so this is kind of the era that she grew up in. She grew up watching her father and her mother be people who were behind the Prophet ﷺ, defending him every step of the way, carrying on this message of Islam. Some of her nicknames, which are really beautiful, there's actually a lot, but we'll talk about two. One of her nicknames was As-Siddiqa bintu Siddiq, right? She was the truthful, the daughter of the truthful one, because we know Abu Bakr used to be referred to as Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And her other nickname is Habibatu Habibillah, the lover of the love of Allah. So we know that Rasul sallallahu was the love of Allah. Allah loved him the most, right? And Aisha was the one that the Rasul sallallahu loved most of people, right? So actually there was a time when Rasul sallallahu was asked, who do you love most? Like straight up, he was asked that way. And his answer was Aisha. And then they said, and then who? And he responded with Abuha, her father. And something that's beautiful about the way he said that, this is a small lesson we can take. First of all, he was not ashamed to proclaim his love for Aisha among the people. He was not afraid to say, that's my wife and I love her, right? It's the first thing that's a little different than people these days, right? And the second thing was because of how much he loved her, Aisha herself, when he was asked, okay, who do you love next after Aisha? He could have said Abu Bakr's name, Abu Bakr, like he could have said that. But instead he said Abuha, her father, just showing you that he loved Aisha so much, the love that he had for Abu Bakr and Aisha, they were kind of related. Because they were related to each other, his love for her was for her and for her father together. So he even references her father by using her name, right? So that just shows you how much he truly loves her. And something interesting about Aisha that we should know is that 1/4 of our deen as we know it today comes from things that she taught us. She narrated, among the two people who've narrated the most hadiths, she's one of the two. The other one is Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu. Interestingly, Abu Huraira, if you were to count how many hadiths he narrated more than Aisha. But Aisha narrated more unique hadiths. There were certain things that Aisha was the only one that could teach us about it. And that's because Aisha lived with the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? She was inside his home. She saw the way he dealt with his family. She saw the way he interacted from the inside out. So Aisha is able to give us a little sneak peek of what it was like to live with the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and a lot of the hadiths that we know and live by today are narrated by her. So she's a really, really important woman. Now, how did her and the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam end up getting married? So let's talk about that story for a little bit first. Now, we know, who knows the name of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's first ever wife? What was her name? Khadija, very good. And we know, yeah, good job. What's your name? Leah. Good job, Leah. So Khadija was his first wife, and he loved Khadija. Loved Khadija. To the point where when Khadija radiallahu anha passed away, he went through years and years and years of grief. And not a single day passed him by for the rest of his life from the day that she died, except that he would mention her. Every single day he would mention Khadija. He loved her, right? She was with him at a very, very hard time in his life when he first received revelation, yeah? Now, Khadija, we know that she passes away, and the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, you know, usually around this time, it was pretty normal for two things. Number one, for men to be married. It wasn't normal for someone to stay single for a long period of time. The Arab culture was that you get married and you're married. And not only that, it was also very normal for men to be married to multiple wives during this time in the Arab. Now, Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam went for years where he didn't marry not a single person, not one, not two, not many, right? And it was because of his heart was so attached to Khadija that he had a hard time being able to move on from that. So this is the period of time that we're talking about. So years after Khadija radiallahu anha passed away, the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is still single at this point. He's in his 50s or so at this point. And what happens is he actually gets a dream. And in his dream, he sees that Jibreel comes down with a green silk, and in it is an image of Aisha radiallahu anha. And Jibreel comes and kind of says to him that this is going to be your wife in this life and the next. And he gets this dream 3 days in a row, the same exact dream, where he's seeing Jibreel come down and show him Aisha and saying that she's going to be his wife in this life and the next. And initially, the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam doesn't do anything with that dream. He doesn't tell anybody about it. He keeps it to himself, right? Again, he's still grieving. He's still a little bit upset, you know. He's not really ready yet to make that next move. But what happens is the matchmaker comes to him. The matchmaker of the community, her name was Khawla bint Hakim. She was someone who, you guys know what a matchmaker's role is, right? You find the people who are single of the guys, you find the people who are single of the girls, and try to get them to know each other, try to set up marriages among them. One day, Khawla bint Hakim, the matchmaker, comes and suggests Aisha to the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And when she says that, the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is now thinking about the dream, like, oh my God, this is the moment where this dream is supposed to be fulfilled, right? So he agrees to allow Khawla bint Hakim to offer the proposal on his behalf. Now, Khawla goes to the parents of Aisha, Abu Bakr and Ruman. And the first thing that happens, well, first, Ruman was home alone at this time. And Khawla comes and she's like, so what do you think? Like the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And obviously she's ecstatic because who better than the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to marry her daughter off to, right? But at first she's like, Abu Bakr is not home yet. Let's wait till he gets home and let's ask him. So Abu Bakr gets home and Khawla's sitting there and she's like, what do you think of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? You know? And she opens the conversation again. And subhanAllah, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's response is so innocent and so beautiful. The first thing that he's worried about when he sees that the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is coming to propose to his daughter, he says, but me and the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam are like brothers. Is it okay for her to marry someone who's like, he's my brother, so that would be like her uncle or her nephew, right? Is it okay for her to marry someone who's related to her like that? Because of how close they were, Abu Bakr and the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he was like, wait, is that even halal? That was his first innocent question, right? So Khawla, she goes back to the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and she asks him, like, is it halal? Are we okay? And the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's response was so beautiful. He says, me and Abu Bakr, we are brothers in Islam, right? But this brotherhood that we have is not the same as blood brotherhood, right? So we're not actually related by blood, so that it's halal to continue on. Now the second, not problem, but the second concern that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu has is, it was a norm of the Arab back in the day that when their kids were little, because you got to think like the way they functioned, it was all about tribes and leaders and nations. And from when kids were born, like literally in infancy and toddlerhood, they would say, yeah, when this girl grows up, she's going to marry this guy. She's going to marry the guy from this tribe. And she's going to marry the guy from this tribe, right? So they would kind of set up the marriages from when the children were little. And it was on the assumption that when the girl meets that age where she's ready to get married, then they continue the marriage. So Aisha radiallahu anha, from when she was little, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu had already kind of made a promise to another person that she was supposed to get married to. And the name of that man is Jubair, and he's the son of a man named Mut'am. Now, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, obviously, there's not a single person that he would want his daughter to marry more than the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? But Abu Bakr was a truthful and honest man, and he did not want to break his word that he gave to Mut'am, right? That we were going to marry our children to each other. So he's kind of nervous, right? He has to go now and have a conversation with Mut'am to tell him, you know, to try to basically come out of the engagement in a way. Now, what's interesting about Mut'im's family and Jubayr, the son, was that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he goes and he talks to them and he's like, so, like, remember that agreement we had years ago? He's like, where are we at with that now? Like, is that still happening? What are you guys thinking? And subhanAllah, that family was a family of disbelievers. They did not believe and they did not have intentions of becoming Muslims. And when the thought of Islam crosses them, they're kind of like, yeah, that religion's not really for us. And so Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he's listening to them, and the mom initially, he goes to the father and he says, what do you think? And the father's like, ask his mom. So then the mom starts talking. And the mom's like, well, you know, you guys have this religion now, and we're not really feeling that. We don't want your daughter to mess up our kid by introducing him to that religion. She's like, yeah, I don't think this is going to work. Now, Abu Bakr, inside his heart, he's like, yes, I got out of it, right? But obviously on the outside, he's like, oh, okay, you know, they're negotiating. And at the end, they decide that the engagement is going to be broken. And so Aisha is now, quote, back on the market. And so it's at this time that the proposal is made officially and accepted. And Aisha radiallahu anha at this point was still young. She hadn't reached the age of puberty yet where she was going to be ready to be married. But the agreement is made. So now it's just a matter of time until she's ready and then they get married. So that's kind of the story of how Aisha radiallahu anha and Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam end up marrying each other, which I think is important to know. Now let's get into more of the nitty gritty of what we want to talk about today. So one thing that we have to know is that being married to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, obviously because of his character and because of who he was amazing, right? Like you are literally married to the absolute best person ever to exist. But it did not come without its challenges, right? Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was someone that was targeted by the people around him, right? He's coming with this new message. He's telling people, stop worshiping the idols that they've been worshiping for years, right? So he's kind of changing a lot of things that society is used to, right? And for people who come and do that, they end up being targets of a lot of hate, you know, a lot of difficulty. The people who grew up around the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his wives did not live a lavish life. They weren't rich, they weren't wealthy, they didn't have food on the table every day. They lived in poverty. They would have, you know, they would go through periods of hunger, lots of difficulty, lots of hate. So it was also a sacrifice that the wives of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam had to make. You know, they had to sacrifice a lot from themselves in order to stay with the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there came a time when the difficulty around the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so strong that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually commanded Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam to go to his wives. And these ayahs are in the Quran where Allah commands the Rasul to go to his wives and basically say to them, it's okay if you no longer want to continue in our marriage because of how difficult all the difficulty that our marriage might bring to your life. So literally the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is tasked with, go to every single one of your wives and ask them, do you want to stay in this marriage or do you want to be allowed to leave the marriage? And if you choose to leave, there would be no blame on you because of how hard and difficult it was to participate, you know, to be in this marriage. And the ayahs themselves are in Surah Al-Ahzab. It's ayahs number 28 and 29. So I'll read them in English for the sake of time. Basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O Prophet, say to your wives, if you desire the life of this world and its glitter of adornment, then come, I will give you provision for your enjoyment and release you with a graceful release. And if you desire to seek Allah and His Messenger and a home in the hereafter, then know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prepared for you a great reward. So the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam decides he wants to go talk to Aisha first. So she's going to be the first wife that he discusses this with. And he goes to Aisha, hoping in his heart that she chooses to stay with him, right? Because of how much he loved her. But he goes to her and he says, I want to ask you something. He says, but please take your time before you respond and please take the opinion of your parents. He says, I'm going to say something. Don't be hasty in your answer. Don't answer me right away. Think about it. Talk to your parents and then come back to me. And what she says as a response is so beautiful. And I want to read it in Arabic because I think Arabic just sounds so much better for those of you guys who can understand it, but I'll translate it. Basically, she responds by saying, أَفِيكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ أَسْتَشِيرُ أَبَوَيْ. In you, O Prophet ﷺ, you want me to ask my parents about this? She says, بَلْ أَخْتَارُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَالدَّارُ الْآخِرَةِ. She's like, there is no doubt in my heart that I choose you, and I choose Allah, and I choose the akhirah. So in that moment, she didn't have to think about it. She chose the Rasul ﷺ and Allah and his path right away. So it's a beautiful, beautiful response. Now, this is, the rest of the story is kind of funny. It just kind of shows you what Aisha radiallahu anha was like, her personality. After she says this beautiful, amazing response that all of us should like memorize, keep in our heart, and remember day in and day out, she says, "Oh Rasulullah, please, when you go talk to the other wives, don't tell them what my response was." And the reason why she did that is because it's kind of like, you know how when you come up with like something amazing and you want it to be attributed to just you? She's like, please don't tell the others how I answered, because this is my answer. You know, it's mine. This is what I did. So that just kind of shows you what she was like. And a part of her may have wanted the other wives to choose not to continue with the Rasul ﷺ, right? Because of how much she loved him, it's like she just wanted him all to herself. So subhanAllah, now the Rasul ﷺ, when he hears this from her, he knows that it's against his character to lie or to hide something from his wives. So he tells her up front, sorry, I'm not going to be able to fulfill that for you. If they ask me, I have to be honest and do my due diligence, and I have to respond to them and give them the same answer that you said. And subhanAllah, when the Rasul ﷺ goes to every single other wife, the first question is, what did Aisha say? And he says the response of Aisha, and then all of them respond in the same exact words that Aisha used. So there was not a single one of the Prophet ﷺ's wives that chose to leave him during this time. Even though they were given blank check, you could go and it's fine, but they all chose to stay with the Rasul, even though that meant that their lives were going to be difficult. People were going to attack them. They were going to live in poverty. They were going to live in hunger, right? But they chose to accept all of those things so that they could stay with Rasul ﷺ, and so they could continue on the path of Allah and inshallah into Jannah. Now, let's set the stage of what was happening in the society at the time when this big scandal happens. We know that Islam first started as a new message. The number of believers was really small. As it continued, it grew in believers, but it also grew in haters, right? And there becomes a period in time where there's a lot of people who are confessing to be Muslims, quote, Muslims on the outside, but are actually hypocrites on the inside. And during this particular time in the Seerah, hypocrisy was on the rise. So the hypocrites were like plotting against the Muslimin at this point, trying to make divides between the Muslims. And the leader of them, his name was Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul. He's a very important character in the story that we're going to talk about. What we have to know for the sake of simplicity is that at this point in time, the hypocrites kind of had some beef with Rasul ﷺ. So they wanted to cause trouble. They were waiting for any opportunity to cause trouble and to tear the Muslims apart. And the leader of them, like we said, his name was Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul. Now, the Muslims at this point are still traveling country to country, city to city, trying to spread the message of Islam and trying to take over land that they can turn into Muslim lands, right? So it was during the time when they were on a particular battle to extract more land, right? And now they're on the way back from the battle. And it was normal for the Rasul ﷺ that every time he went on some kind of expedition, he would put all of his wives' names in a hat and pick one. And every time, one of his wives would accompany him on the expedition. So he always had one of them with him. For this particular one, Aisha radiallahu anha was the one that came with him. So they go, they do the battle, they win, and now they're on their way back. And what happens is the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, when they were transported, number one, we have to know they were always covered completely. So no one could see their face, no one could identify them. Not only that, but they were protected so much so that, kind of imagine like a camel or a horse. The wives of the Prophet would be in a closed carriage on top of that. So no one could really tell like if someone was in there, who's in there. But that was the way that they were transported. It's kind of think of like royalty, right? They had a special little thing that was closed, nobody could see. So Aisha radiallahu anha, when she's reporting the story, she talks about how on the way back, she notices that she loses her necklace. So she's looking, she can't find her necklace. She stops everybody. She's like, guys, I lost my necklace, right? Everybody stops. They're looking for Aisha radiallahu anha's necklace, and eventually it's found, okay? Now Aisha, after she found her necklace, she realized, well, now I got to go to the bathroom. This is really funny. At the time at this time, the way that they didn't have like a typical nice washroom here with a wudu station and water. No, that's not what it was like. What the women had to do, and especially the women, they would have to walk like really far, far away from where civilization was, and they would use the bathroom there. There were specific locations they would have to walk really far out to, relieve themselves, and then come back. So at this point in time, she has to relieve herself, so she walks away from the group of people to relieve herself, and she comes back. When she comes back, she realizes that they're all gone. They all continued and left without her. And as she's narrating, she talks about how at this point I was very light in weight. So she's like, they probably thought that I was sitting there in the carriage because of how light I was. They didn't realize that I wasn't there. So now the whole army of people has passed. She's alone, and she decides to just go wait and sit in a specific area. And she knew that the Rasul ﷺ would always make it one person's job. It was always one person's job after these expeditions where he would wait for all the people to pass, like a couple hours after, and he would walk afterwards to make sure that nobody was left behind, nothing was left behind. So there was one person that was kind of like the collector, right, to collect anything that may have been left. This person's name on that particular day, his name was Safwan. So Safwan now is walking, doing his job, looking around, seeing if anything has been lost. He goes up to Aisha, who at this point now had fallen asleep, and he sees her face, okay? Usually they're covered, but she's asleep. And he sees her face, and he recognizes her as Aisha, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. And as she's narrating the hadith, she talks about how this particular Sahabi, Safwan, the reason why he recognized her was because he had seen her once before hijab was even a thing. So he knew what her face looked like, and he recognized that this was the Prophet ﷺ's wife. The only words that he says to her, this is important, the only words that he says to her throughout this whole story, he says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. That's the only words that he says. And the reason why he says that is in his head, he's kind of like, oh my God, of all the people to lose, we lost the Prophet's wife. Like that's kind of what he's thinking. So he says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He does not look at her. He doesn't say any more words to her. He mounts his camel down. He makes the camel kneel. And he allows her to get on the camel, and then he walks her back into Medina. That's what happened. That's the story, right? Now, they walk back into Medina. It's important to note that they were walking back in broad daylight. It's the middle of the day. Everyone's out. Everybody can see what's happening. Now, if someone did something wrong, they wouldn't be like out there in the middle of the day showing it to people, right? If someone did something wrong, they would probably sneak away in the night, and then by the time morning comes, everything's normal. So it's important to note that they came back in the middle of the day, hence there was nothing wrong or nothing to hide. They're coming normal. He was doing his job. He did what he had to do. Now, as he's entering, guess who's on the outskirts of Medina looking? Yes. Okay, good. You guys are still listening to me. Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul. He's like looking, and he's like, oh, I found it. Like I got the moment that I needed. And all he had to say was a few words that stir up the entire community from this point. All he says is he kind of looks at them. He's got like a group of people around him. When people gossip and they bring a little posse of people, he's got a little group of people around them. And he's like, he's not safe with her, and she's not safe with him. He's like, something happened between them. That's it. He didn't say a particular thing. He didn't make an accusation of a particular act. That's all he had to say was something happened between them. And of course, word goes from one to another, to another, to another person. Eventually, the story builds, and the rumor is that they committed zina. That's the rumor that's going around. Now, it's important to note that Aisha radiallahu anha, at this period of time, when she's brought back into Medina, she got sick during the expedition. She was home in her house for a whole month. And rumors are going around, and she has no idea that it's happening. She's home. She's not out in the community. She's not hearing what people are saying. She has no idea what's happening. There are three particular people who I'm going to mention by name. These people were Sahaba. They were companions. They were righteous. They were good people. But they were the three who spread the rumors about Aisha the most. The first one, her name was Hamna bint Jahsh. She's the sister of Zainab, who is one of the Prophet's wives. Another wife is Zainab. She is the sister. And the reason why she starts spreading rumors is because she thought, maybe if I put Aisha down, then Zainab will rise up in the eyes of the Rasul ﷺ. So she was kind of, quote, trying to do her sister a favor and spreading this rumor. So she, great person, righteous person, but she was one of the people who spread that rumor the most. The second person is Hassan bin Thabit. He was the poet of the Rasul ﷺ. He was the person who, when everybody in the community was going against the Rasul ﷺ, he was using his poetry to defend him. But during this time, he was one of the people that was slandering Aisha the most, also spreading the rumor around. And the third person, his name is Mistah, and he's the cousin of Aisha, and he was a person who fought in the Battle of Badr. Now, the reason why we mentioned these three people in specific is because there's a huge lesson to take from this. These were three righteous, good people, yet they still fell into this sin. They still made this mistake. And the message I want to draw from this is, this problem of gossip and slander and backbiting and talking, spreading rumors is not something that just, unreligious people do. It's a disease that can affect religious and non-religious people. It's a disease that can affect righteous and non-righteous people, people who are in the masjid and people who are out. So for those of us who are people who attend lectures and are, quote, religious and try to stay on the right path, I don't want us to sit here and thinking, oh, I would never do that, you know, because these were righteous people who did that. It's that big of a fitna. It's that big of a difficulty, right? So these three people, we're going to come back to them, but it's important to mention them by name because of what they did. Now, Aisha radiallahu anha, again, we said she's sick, she's at home, she has no idea what's happening. There are a few things that happen that give her an inclination like, something's not right here. So during the time when she was sick, she mentions that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the way that he interacted with her, he says that he wasn't as loving or as gentle as he usually is. He would still come to her when he was supposed to. He would still send salam to her, but he would just come in and be like, how are you? That was it. Salam, how are you? And Aisha, because of how much she knows the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam intimately, she knows that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was much more loving and gentle with her usually. So that's the first thing where she's kind of like he's acting a little different, but, you know, still thought nothing of it. But she noticed he's acting a little bit different. The moment that she actually realizes that this is happening is, remember when we talked about when they have to use the bathroom, where do they have to go? Really far away, right? So she one of the days she has to relieve herself, and she's walking with Mustah, right? Remember who's Mustah? Her cousin who was backbiting her. So this is her aunt walking with her to relieve themselves, and on the way, Mustah trips and falls, and as soon as she fell, she makes a dua against her son Mustah. Like she says, like, you know, like Mustah. And Aisha herself corrects her, and she says to her, how dare you say something bad like that about someone who witnessed Badr? And you could tell she has no idea what Mustah is saying about her, right? He's like, how could you say something so bad about him, when this is a man who witnessed Badr? And then Mustah is like, do you not know what he's been saying about you? And then she tells her about what's been said and about the scandal. And this is the moment that she finally realizes that the entire community has been talking bad about her for a whole month, and she has no idea. She goes back to her house. She cries and cries and cries. She says that she's cried for 2 long nights in which she did not sleep. And in her narration, she says that I cried so much that my tears dried and I thought my liver was going to explode. She's like, that's how hurt and upset I was. That's how hard I was crying. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, obviously the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and a lot of her loved ones are in a hard place right now. The Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam may not have the ability to say, no, I know she's right, because then what are the hypocrites going to say? He's just defending his wife, right? So the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is in a tough spot where he knows that Aisha wouldn't do such a thing, but he also can't proclaim it because of what's happening in the community around him, right? So the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abu Bakr, the mother, Roman are all in a hard spot. But there was a particular time when Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's sitting there and he's just hoping, waiting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to make a revelation and set it all straight. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from his wisdom, chooses not to do that for a whole month, right? During that whole month, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses not yet to, you know, declare her innocence. And so the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he has no revelation, he has no idea what to do or what to say to people. So he gathers a shura of his family members and he says, what do you guys think I should do? Like, how should I react in this situation? And one of them tells him, you should go speak to someone named Barira. Barira was the freed slave of Aisha, someone who knew Aisha really, really well. He's like, you should go talk to her. She knows Aisha really well. She could probably, you know, make a guess as to what happened or how she would, you know, handle herself. So Rasulullah asked her, and he's like, you know, what do you think of this situation? And of course, Barira says, I know nothing bad about Aisha. She would never do such a thing. And interestingly, she's like, the only thing that she's ever done wrong that I've seen is that when she cooks, she leaves the dough outside, and overnight, the animals come and eat it. That's the only bad thing she's ever seen Aisha do, is she's not a good cook, really. That's all she said. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, again, he's struggling here. Doesn't know what to say, doesn't know how to address the community. But one day he decides he has to go to the minbar and he has to say something. And so he says in a khutbah, he says, who is going to relieve me of a man who is bringing harm to my family? Now he's like, we got to make an end to this gossip. We got to make an end to this rumor. And he's talking to different tribes of people now. Which of you guys is basically going to bring our truth, bring our haqq, and take care of this? And the Rasul also says, Wallahi ma alimtu ala ahli illa khayra. He's like, Wallahi, by Allah, I know nothing but good things about my family. And on top of that, not only does he kind of, in a sense, declare the innocence of Aisha, but he also defends Safwan, the man who was also a victim of the slander. Now, this is a powerful thing that the Rasul did, because usually, like if you were to bring any man today who you go to him and you says, hey, I think your wife was having an affair with another man, right? Let's say that that's what happened. That man would go find that guy and probably kill him, right? Do something really bad to him. But the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he wasn't a narcissist like that. It wasn't about him. He wasn't thinking about himself. He defended that man because that man was also a victim of slander, right? So truth is truth. If they did nothing wrong, they don't deserve any negativity or any hate. So during this khutbah, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentions he mentions that I know nothing but good of my family, and he defends the honor of Safwan, who was also being slandered at that time. Now, the Rasul ﷺ, after this month has passed, he goes to Aisha radiallahu anha in her home. And at this point, Aisha is sitting with her mother and with her father. And he says to her, oh Aisha, he's like, this is what's been said about you in the community. He said, if you are innocent, then Allah will declare it. Allah is going to bring your innocence if you are innocent. And then he says, if you committed the act, then seek forgiveness and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for repentance. And Allah will accept the repentance of those who seek it. Now, you see, it's a very, politically correct way to address her, right? He didn't say you did it or you didn't do it. He was speaking to her like a prophet. He wasn't necessarily bringing in the connection that they have, husband-wife. He was speaking to her like, this is what Allah says, right? And that response made Aisha very irritated because she wanted someone to come to her and say, I know you didn't do it. But obviously we know the Rasul ﷺ couldn't do that. And so she turns to her father and she's like, say something. Please say something to defend my honor to him. And Abu Bakr is like, there's nothing I can say. Like, he spoke the truth. There's nothing wrong about what he said. She turns to her mother, say something to defend my honor. Say something to the Rasul. And she's like, nothing bad was said. I can't say anything. And so she remembers the verses that were mentioned by Yaqub radiallahu anhu, the father of Yusuf. فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانُ عَلَى مَا تَصِفُونَ. He says, she says, I'm just going to exhibit a beautiful patience, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take care of me and my matters. Moments later, as she says this, she's now thinking to herself, oh my God, like she realizes in this moment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that's going to be able to declare her innocence and the only person that's going to be able to set this all straight. And she's thinking to herself, like, wow, I never thought that I would be someone who is worthy enough for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to talk about me in the Quran. But subhanAllah, moments later, they're looking at the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He starts to have that look on him that he had when he would receive revelation. And he received the ayahs in Surah An-Nur where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declares the innocence of Aisha. And we'll talk about those ayahs in a second, but just to show you the response, as soon as he hears these ayahs, right, he gets these ayahs revealed to him, he starts smiling. He says to Aisha, oh Aisha, Allah has declared your innocence. Like you're free now, you're innocent. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying it himself. Now Ruman is sitting here and she's like, yeah, like it's been declared. She's like, go give the Rasul a hug. Like, yeah, this is great. And Aisha's like, nope. I'm just going to praise Allah right now, right? Again, just to show you what Aisha was like. So she's like, my praise is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone in this moment. Now, what were the ayahs that were revealed? What did they talk about? We won't go in depth for the sake of time, but there was a couple major themes. The first one is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called out all the liars. Not by name, but he called them out as liars, saying that this thing that they were spreading was not true and that it was a lie. So number one, calling out the liars. Number two, which is really important, he also called out, not by name, but as a group, the good people, the righteous people who participated in the slander. So he called out the hypocrites who were like way wrong, but also all you good people, why didn't you stand up to defend your sister? Why did you participate in the slander, in the gossip, in all the bad things that were happening? And then the third point mentioned in these ayahs that I want to mention in Arabic because it sounds so much more beautiful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتَحْسَبُونَهُ هَيِّنًا وَهُوَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ عَظِيمٌ. You think that it's small, but in the eyes of Allah, it's large. Because a lot of the people that were participating in the slander, they weren't people who necessarily were like, ooh, we're going to get them. Not all of, some of them were, but not all of them, right? We mentioned there were righteous people who participated. Because what happens in a group where people are gossiping and slandering, it's not like people are internalizing the information. It's just quick on the tongue. It's quick. People are talking, did you hear what happened to this? Did you hear what happened to this? And people are just quickly repeating the things that they've heard without actually internalizing what's being said. So Allah is saying, you think it's small. You think you just utter it and that's it and you can move on. But in the eyes of Allah, it's a strong, big thing, right? And the scholars mention that in these groups of ayahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's anger towards the people who slandered Aisha was like no other anger that's mentioned in the Quran. That's how angry Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that the people who slandered Aisha, especially the hypocrites of them, they have a punishment like no other punishment because of how bad of a sin that this was. Now, the people who are righteous, like specifically those three names of people, who they were good people, but they made a mistake, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded for their punishment to happen in this life though. So they received a punishment here. Why? If you compare that to the chief of them, what was his name? The chief of the hypocrites, the really bad guy in the story? Very good. Abdullah bin Ubay bin Salul. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded that that man, nobody touch that man. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saving his punishment for the hereafter. Allah says that if he were to get any degree of punishment here, then that's gonna loosen or lessen his punishment later. So Allah says for that particular man, his punishment is later. So he gets off the hook in the dunya. But for the righteous people, they get their punishment here, and then that helps to expiate them from that sin. Now, a couple things. I think I have like 5 minutes left, right? Something like that. Yeah, 5? Okay. I'm going to mention a few things really quickly. There's a beautiful commentary that was mentioned by Imam Qurtubi. He talks about different people. So Aisha, now that we've learned, she's an example of somebody who was a victim of slander in the community. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends up declaring her innocence. There were other people in history who were in similar situations. For example, you guys remember the story of Yusuf alayhi salam? When they mentioned about his actions with the Imra'atul Aziz? Yes. So Yusuf radiallahu anhu was exonerated, so he was proved to be made innocent by that young boy, which in the story there's the shahidun min ahli, right? There was a person there that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in Yusuf alayhi salam's path to help prove his innocence. So Yusuf alayhi salam had the young boy. Maryam alayhi salam, do you guys remember what people said about Maryam, right? She comes with a child and people are like, this child had to come from somewhere, right? So people are slandering Maryam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala proves the innocence of Maryam through who? Through her son. Very good. Isa, right? He allows the baby to talk from the cradle. Aisha in specific, though, all these people before her were exonerated or proved innocent by other people. But for Aisha in specific, she was exonerated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. She's the only person who Allah himself reveals revelation to prove her innocence. So that just shows you her status in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, let's talk about some lessons that we learned from this whole story in the last 10 minutes that we have. The first one is, let me ask you guys this. Has anybody ever been on the metro train? Has anyone ever taken a train to go downtown, go to school? You guys know that thing they say, like every single time you go on the train, they say, if you see something, say something. Please report any suspicious behavior. Yeah? You guys know what I'm talking about? Now here, I'm going to tell you do the opposite. If you see something, you see someone around you do something wrong, don't say something. Don't spread it. If you even hear that someone said that this person did this, don't spread it, right? Because during the time, all it took was someone to say a couple words, and for months, the entire community is in shambles because of a couple words of one person, okay? So it's powerful. These words that we say, these rumors that we spread are powerful. And you guys know rumors nowadays in our society can literally destroy someone's life, right? You know something happens and people are talking bad about a person. Maybe that person has a hard time getting married in the future. Maybe that person has a hard time finding a job in the future, right? And it could be based on something that's not even true. So if you see something, if you hear something, don't say something. Do not be a person who is a part of spreading gossip or slander about people, okay? Again, remember that it takes one word, one moment that can lead to fitna that lasts for months, years, and can destroy a person's life. Do you guys know, I bet you've heard this ayah multiple times in the Quran. What example does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use in the Quran when he's talking about slander and backbiting? There's a very graphic image that Allah describes. Who knows what it is? He says people who slander and backbite, it's like doing this disgusting thing. Sisters who were here with me last week, you should know the answer. Yeah. Yes, eating the flesh of your dead brother. So imagine Saeed over here. Imagine, I'm just going to pick on you, Saeed, because I know your mom. Let's say we slaughtered Saeed right here in front of us all, okay? And one of his brothers over here just goes up to his dead corpse and starts eating from it. It's disgusting, right? That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, that's how he equates gossiping, backbiting, slander. It's as disgusting as doing that. That's how bad of a sin, how disgusting of a sin it is. There's a beautiful hadith where Allah subhanahu or the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions to us, "Min husni islam al-mar tarkuhu ma la yu'ni." In order for you to perfect your deen, to perfect your Islam, the people who have the most perfect Islam are the people who leave the things that don't belong to them. They leave the things that have nothing to do with them, right? If something is not impacting your life, you don't need to be talking about it, you don't need to be participating in it, you leave the thing that does not concern you, okay? The problem that we have, especially among young people, is it's like the story at lunchtime. What happened to this girl? What happened to that guy? People are talking. Words are circulating, right? And it almost becomes, if I don't talk with them, then I'm like not cool. It's like the cool people are the ones doing all the talking, and if I don't participate, then I'm not cool, right? But we don't want to be cool in this life, right? We want to be cool later in the next life, inshallah. So if something does not affect you, if something does not pertain to you, then it's best to leave it. Don't participate in it. And the last thing that I will say, and this is a hadith Rasul mentions, and he basically talks about, there was a time when he had all the Sahaba gathered around him. All done? Okay. I have 5 minutes? Okay, I'll talk really slowly for the rest of it then. The Prophet ﷺ gathers the Sahaba around him, and he's like, do you guys know who is bankrupt? He's like, how do you define somebody who's bankrupt? If I were to ask you guys that, what does it mean to be bankrupt? Who's bankrupt? Yeah. Yeah, somebody who has no money is bankrupt, right? And that's exactly what the Sahaba said. Good job. What's your name? Zakaria. Is your mom Anwar? Oh my God. Subhanallah. Good job, Zakaria. So yeah, the Sahaba answered it exactly like you just answered it. They said the bankrupt person is a person who has no money. And the Rasul ﷺ corrected them, and he said, no, the bankrupt person is the person who they fast all their Ramadans, they pray all their salahs, they give all their zakats, but also in addition to doing all of those righteous deeds, they slandered this one, they oppressed that one, they said bad about that one. So on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala drags that person into Jahannam. Now what do we learn from this? It's not enough for us to be people who just pray and fast and give charity. That's not what our deen, it's not all of our deen. That's a part of our deen. But our deen doesn't teach us to be people who just do all the deeds, but then the way that we interact with people is not nice. Our deen teaches us your actions have to follow that belief that's inside your heart. Your actions that you do in the masjid, those prayers, when you deal with people at work, people at school, people in your family, those prayers should affect the way that you interact, right? So it's not enough for us to just be people who do the checklist of all the good things that a good Muslim is supposed to do, and then to slander people, gossip about people, be disrespectful to people. We should be ones that our character is a walking image of what Islam means. That all the things that we read in our Quran, that we memorize in our Quran, all the things that we recite in our prayers, when we act outside of those things, our actions mimic those. So it's not enough for us to just be people of those, quote, good deeds without those deeds reflecting into our interactions with one another, okay? Now, there's a lot that we talked about here, okay? But if I were to leave you with one thing, it's this last thing. And it's related to the last hadith that I just mentioned, okay? We are going to walk out of here hoping and praying that if we ever encounter a group of people who is gossiping or is slandering or is saying bad things, there's a couple of things that we can choose to do. Number one, and this would be like the highest level, if you can attain it, I encourage you to stop the slander. So if you're in a group of people and everybody's talking badly, you be the one to stand up and say, guys, we shouldn't be doing this. Guys, you know, this is not the right thing to do. Guys, let's talk about something. Let's talk about the weather. Let's talk about sports. Let's talk about something else. So if you have the ability, level one, the highest thing you can achieve, is to stop it. If you don't have the ability to stop it, you can do another thing, and that's defend the person that's being slandered. So let's say everyone's talking about Shereen, okay? Everyone's saying bad about me. You can be someone who instead says good things about me, right? So defend me or say the opposite, say good things. Number three, if you can't do number one, you can't stop it, and you can't defend the person, then it's best for you to remove yourself from that gathering. When a gathering is doing that, those bad deeds are being written on every person in the gathering. Even if you're just sitting there like with the popcorn, listening to all the tea, listening to all the stuff people are saying, even if you're not saying anything, you're still getting the bad deeds like you are. So at least save yourself. If you don't have the ability to speak out against it or defend that person, at least save yourself and remove yourself from that situation, from that group. Don't participate in it, okay? That's all I have. I ran out of time, yeah? Awesome. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. Thank you guys for your attention.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much, Sister Shereen. That was beautiful, amazing, very inspirational. May Allah bless you and all of us with success in this life and in the hereafter. And may Allah protect us all from any gossip, from our ears, our mouth, anything. May Allah protect us. Please say Ameen, everyone. So now we're gonna just go into our announcements. Before this one, I just wanna point out that there's a lot of children in the audience. This is a youth program for high school, college, and young adults. There are designated programs for our youth that are like middle school, elementary. For middle school, we have our Pillars, which is every Friday. For elementary, we have Roots, which starts in September, and then we'll have a Busy Bees, which starts very, very soon as well. So please, we are going to begin being very strict, and if we need to, we will be checking IDs. So whether you're a parent who's bringing their kid or a kid who just wanders into an Ignite event, don't. Okay, so now we're gonna go to the actual announcements. First, we encourage everyone to follow our Instagram to get updates on our future events because we have a lot, and also follow Mosque Foundation and the youth because you get to see our other programs even if they're not just Ignite. Next, we also encourage you guys to join our Remind. All you have to do is text at Ignite MF1 to 81010 to also get announcements, but more personal, like straight to your phone, just text messages. Next is our next event for the series In the Footsteps of Giants, which will be August 12th after Maghrib, like always, with Brother Islam Jabir. And then we'd also like to announce our next week we're having a very special outdoor event. This time it's going to be at the Harlem Center. If you follow our Instagram or you are a part of our Remind, you will see the location there, the Harlem Center, not the Youth Center. And also it's next weekend, July 29th at 7:30 p.m. Inshallah, there's a very, very wide variety of refreshments. And it's outside. And then Mosque Foundation Youth is looking for volunteers for our programs. Like I said, Busy Bees. There's also Roots and some high school programs. So scan the QR code if you guys are all interested. And I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for being very respectful during our dars. There are refreshments from chai tea for you guys to help yourselves with.